ominous." Hillary nervously chuckled as she read the lopsided words carved deeply into the wood of the peeling front door. Hillary and I, who'd both just turned 16 in the fall of 2013, had been best friends since before we could remember. Our houses were next door to each other, and our mothers discovered they were pregnant within weeks of one another. When my mom found out she was having a boy and Hillary's a girl, they, of course, instantly decided that their children would one day be married. While the romance our mothers hoped for never materialized, we were still inseparable, viewing each other more as brother and sister than potential love interests. We shared many of the same hobbies, like the same books and movies, but the thing we bonded over most was studying the Mitchell mystery. Mr. Mitchell had been a bit of a local legend. Living in near complete seclusion for the last 30 years of his life, he was only spotted publicly once a week when he would venture to the grocery store for provisions, mainly microwavable meals and vast quantities of alcohol. In the early 80s, Alfred Mitchell purchased 5 acres of land on the outskirts of town and had a new house constructed on it for him, his wife Elizabeth, and their 8-year-old twin daughters, Maggie and Marcy. Alfred had come to town to work as an engineer in the automobile factory, and Elizabeth was able to secure work as a teacher in the school the girls would be attending. They were, by all accounts, the idyllic American family. Construction on their new home was completed in the fall of 1983, and the family excitedly moved into what was supposed to be their forever home. However, shortly after the Mitchells made the move, something happened. Variations of that something were shared often on playgrounds or at parties. No two accounts were ever exactly identical, but they all contained at least one fact. On a cold night in the winter of 1983, Elizabeth, Maggie, and Marcy simply vanished. Hillary and I were aspiring journalists and were working on an article for the school paper to commemorate the 30th anniversary of the disappearances. We spent months combing through old police records and newspaper articles, as well as interviewing locals who were alive at the time, to come up with the following account of the events, which we believe to be reliably accurate. It was on a Tuesday morning that there were the first inklings of something amiss. Maggie and Marcy's teacher found they were absent when she took roll, and when she went to Elizabeth's classroom to inquire if the girls were sick, she found a room full of rowdy children but no teacher. It was quite unlike Elizabeth to miss work without notice so that the school could find a substitute, and all 3 of them had been present on Monday looking perfectly healthy. Concern grew. The school first made several calls to the Mitchell home, but received no answer. They then called over to the factory where Alfred worked and found that he had not shown up that day either. They'd been trying to reach him too. After one more failed attempt to raise the Mitchells at their house, the school called the police to see if someone could go and check on them. What they found sparked the biggest scandal our town had ever seen. When 2 officers arrived on the property, they saw the front door was wide open, and there were fresh footprints in the snow leading to the shed on the side of the house. Strangely, they noted that whoever had made them had been barefoot. They then announced themselves as the police and called for the Mitchells, but received no response from within. Drawing their weapons, they entered the home, shouting for anyone inside to show themselves and come out with their hands up, and were met with more silence. Yet as they made their way deeper within, they started to hear something coming up the basement steps and through the open basement door. Digging. It was the distinct sound of a shovel hitting dirt and the labored breaths of a man working. They called down the steps to who they now suspected to be Mr. Mitchell. "Mr. Mitchell! Alfred Mitchell, is that you? Alfred, it's the police! Come out now!" The digging continued. Listening more closely, they heard mumblings between the strikes. No. They're down here. They're okay. Just a little further. Just need to keep digging. Just a little deeper." The police decided to head down and investigate, and when they reached the bottom, they found Alfred, who was still in his pajamas and was covered in dirt. It was clear that he had been the one who'd run out to the shed as he was surrounded by tools: a pickaxe, a sledgehammer, spades, and shovels of various sizes. He'd used them to punch a hole roughly 3 feet in diameter through the 3-inch concrete floor and had dug down about 4 feet down already. One officer trained his weapon on Alfred while the other approached him from behind. They both continued to call his name and told him to drop the shovel, but it was like he couldn't hear them. Manically and furiously, he just continued to hack at the dirt until the officer wrapped him up around the chest and tackled him to the ground. It was only as he hit the floor and they wrestled the shovel away from him that he seemed to even notice they were there. Wildly, he screamed, "No, let me go! I must keep digging. I have to save them!" Efforts to calm him were fruitless, so they handcuffed him and dragged him kicking and screaming to their squad car. All the while, he cursed them for stopping him. "You have to let me go. I can still save them. You're killing them. Let me go, you bastards!" They decided it would be best to get him away from the house if they were going to question him, and waited for more officers to arrive on scene to continue to search for the Mitchell women before driving a hysterical Alfred to the station. Once there, they calmed him enough to answer a few questions by telling him that there were officers at the house continuing the search, and that they'd let him join them once he gave them the information they needed. When asked where were his wife and daughters, he responded, "Under the house." They asked, "What do you mean they're under the house?" He replied, "They're in the hole." "What hole?" "The hole under the house." "The hole you dug?" "No." "Did you put them in the hole?" "No." "Did you hurt your family?" "No." "Alfred, where's your family?" "They're in the hole. I need to go back and get them. Let me go." Back in hysterics, he threw the chair he'd been sitting in at an officer's head, at which point they deemed the interview over and locked him in a holding cell. In the meantime, the police made calls to every Mitchell relative and friend they could reach, hoping someone might have heard from or seen Elizabeth or the girls. No one had since the previous day. Given Alfred's strange statements and behavior, suspicion of something nefarious mounted. While Alfred was being questioned, officers continued to search the Mitchell house and property for any trace of the women, alive or otherwise. Yet they found nothing. Both Elizabeth's and Alfred's cars were still in the garage, so Elizabeth hadn't simply driven away with the girls in the night. And all of Elizabeth's and the girls' belongings were left behind: clothes, dolls, toothbrushes. The more they searched, the less likely it seemed that they'd left of their own volition. But there was also no evidence to indicate otherwise. There were no signs of a struggle in the house or vehicles, no bloodstains or areas that looked like they'd gone through a recent deep cleaning. The only tracks in the snow were those of Alfred going to and from the shed, so they hadn't left on foot via the surrounding woods. As it was the only lead Alfred gave them, they radioed from the station to the house to check the basement for another hole, as well as investigate the one Alfred had crudely dug. But the only hole in the basement was Alfred's. The remaining concrete was unblemished from the original build. They suspected that maybe Alfred had snapped, murdered his family, was burying them in the basement when the police found him, and was now confusing the events in his mind. But they'd eventually end up digging down another 6 feet in his hole and would find only undisturbed clay. Days and then weeks passed, and hide nor hair of Elizabeth, Maggie, or Marcy was ever found. Search parties combed the local woods, creeks, lakes. They even inspected the septic system on the property to see if Alfred wasn't lying about them being in a hole underground, just about the location of it. Nothing. No one heard from them or saw them. They had, for all intents and purposes, evaporated. After a month of searching, hope of finding them alive dwindled. Alfred was arrested on kidnapping, as opposed to murder, charges related to the disappearances as no bodies had been found. But they knew the case was flimsy at best. The only evidence against him were the insane statements about his family being in a hole in the basement. However, given a thorough investigation of the basement had been completed, and the women were definitively not down there, that made him more guilty of impeding a police investigation than kidnapping. Further questioning of Alfred gave no more leads, and under advisement of his lawyer, he changed his story slightly. He didn't deny that he had believed the women were in a hole in the basement and was digging down there trying to find them, but he stated that he must have been suffering from a mental breakdown on waking up and being unable to find his wife and children. A Vietnam veteran, Alfred reported that he struggled with his mental health since returning from the war, and he must have flashed back to having to dig out several of his missing comrades after they were buried under dirt and rubble by an explosion. While that might have explained why he behaved the way that he did on that day, it still didn't explain where his wife and daughters were. Now, when asked where they'd gone, Alfred would only say, "I don't know." When I went to sleep, the girls were in their beds and Elizabeth was in mine. When I woke up, they weren't. With no hard evidence, no confession of wrongdoing, and no new leads, the case against him was dropped before it even went to trial. Alfred seemed genuinely distraught that the women were missing, and sobbed every time he was brought in for questioning. And while most believed he had something to do with it, there just wasn't any proof. By February of 1984, Alfred was a free man, and the search for his family was called off. Of course, that didn't stop the court of public opinion from convicting him. Alfred became a pariah in town as wild rumors circulated on what happened that night. Many speculated that he actually had murdered the women. He'd just done a perfect job of it. Others condemned him as an abuser who'd driven his family to flee. A few bitter men accused Elizabeth of running off with a lover, and then there was a small contingent that claimed Alfred was a Russian spy and that his family had been taken due to a failure of some kind. Each theory was just as valid in its invalidity as the next. Then came the supernatural suggestions, which the majority completely brushed off. But given the natural suggestions couldn't account for 3 women just vanishing into thin air, they were the ones that intrigued me and Hillary the most. One was that Elizabeth, Maggie, and Marcy had been abducted by aliens who were looking to study the human female, and they planted false memories in Alfred's mind to make him forget what really happened. Another was that they'd been carried off by some sort of flying creature that inhabited the local woods after they went outside to inspect some strange sounds, the very sight of it having broken Alfred's brain. And 2, there were those that believed Alfred had been telling the truth when he made his initial statements to police, that his family was in a hole in the basement. As for some, they felt it was too odd a claim to make for it to be completely fabricated. Maybe Alfred made some terrible deal with the devil, and his family had been swallowed down into hell, they'd say. From our interviews with the locals, we gathered many stories about what might have happened, but nobody had any evidence to back their claims. It wasn't until we spoke with a construction worker, James Priest, that had helped build the Mitchell home, that we caught a break. This is what he told us, transcribed from a recording we made of the interview. "James, what's this for again?" "Hillary, we're working on an article for the school paper for the 30th anniversary of the disappearances." "James, I see. You're not going to make me out to be some kind of crackpot, are you?" "Me? Absolutely not. We're conducting interviews with many people that were alive then, and only plan to include the information we think is relevant to the story. We're planning to present the facts and statements we gather directly from the sources without trying to lead the reader so they can decide which version of the story they think is true." "James, all right, just promise you'll take my words exactly as I say them and won't try to twist them up?" "Hillary and me. We promise." "James, okay, so I guess we need to start back in the summer of '72. This weird group bought up some land on the outskirts of town and started living in the woods. They claimed to be a commune of freethinkers that were experimenting with a new way of living, but we recognized it as a cult." "Hillary, a cult? I've never heard about that before." "James, well, you wouldn't have. It was well before your time and was very short-lived. The Mitchell disappearances are the only thing anyone around her talks about from back in the day, but it was big news then. Shortly after they moved in, some local pets went missing, and a few teens that snuck out to spy on them told their parents that they saw them conducting rituals, chanting in Latin, speaking of blood sacrifices to their dark master." "Me, no way." "James, yep. And this being a good Christian town, we couldn't have a group of devil worshippers living nearby. We sent the police out there with threats to arrest them if they didn't leave, and they agreed to sell the land and move on. The whole thing only lasted around 6 months, and by the time Alfred purchased that same land in the '80s, it was nearly forgotten." "Hillary, wait, Alfred's house was built on the same property that the cult lived on. James. Not just on the same property. He picked the spot right where the teens had seen them conducting the rituals. The cult made a clearing in that spot, and it was the least densely wooded area on the land, so Alfred thought it would make a perfect location for the house. I asked my supervisor if we should tell Alfred why the area was clearer than the surrounding woods, but he recommended we keep it to ourselves. It would, after all, make construction easier. When we broke ground, we found some things that the cult left behind. Old coins with strange symbols, a particularly nasty-looking dagger, the remnants of what might have been a makeshift altar, and most disturbingly, bones from several small animals. All of it was tossed into a dumpster and kept from Mr. Mitchell, as it would have been enormously expensive to move the location of the house after we already started work, and we felt there was no sense in worrying him given we'd cleared all the artifacts out. But let me tell you something. I never felt right about it. That land, there was something wrong with it. Every minute I spent there, I felt on edge, like something was watching me just out of my view. And normally I slept like a baby, especially after being on a job all day. But the entire time that we were building the Mitchell house, I had the most vivid nightmares of my life. I kept seeing my family being burned alive, screaming in agony while I was helpless to save them. I wasn't the only one either. All of us working the job hated it for reasons we couldn't explain and were overjoyed when we finally finished. Though I couldn't shake the pang of guilt I felt when we handed over the keys. I guess I'll say that I wasn't surprised when something strange happened there. Me. So, you think it had something to do with this cult? Do you think they came back for some sort of revenge? James. No, nothing like that. The police kept tabs on them after they left. The leader killed himself in 74, and the rest were either dead or in jail by 83. There was no reason to believe they had anything to do with the Mitchell disappearances. At least not physically. That's why I never said anything about it. Hillary. Not physically? James. That's the last I'm going to say. Like you said, let the reader decide which version of the story they want to believe. With that, we concluded the interview, excited to have a new lead. We were able to dig up some articles from the 70s that corroborated James's story and felt we were onto something sensational. There was something wrong with the land Alfred's house had been built on. We had information that hadn't come to light in nearly 30 wars and thought we needed only one more thing to complete our article, an interview with Alfred himself. However, Alfred hadn't spoken about the events of that night, or much at all for that matter, since the 80s. After his release, townsfolk would often question him during his weekly grocery trip as to what really happened, and they were never satisfied when he'd respond that he didn't know. After some time, he must have realized that trying to defend himself was useless, because he simply stopped responding altogether. And as that was the only topic anyone was interested in discussing with him, in time it became that no one talked to him at all. Only one person in town, Mr. Phillips, took pity on him and gave him a job as a mechanic where he could work quietly behind the scenes. Once a well-off engineer with a bright future and happy family, Alfred then barely made enough to cover his mortgage and booze, of which he consumed plenty, and began his long isolation. People in town often wondered why he didn't just move away. The story, while a local legend, hadn't made national news, so he was unlikely to be recognized elsewhere and could possibly start over again. While he'd let the house fall into an awful state of disrepair, the roof was sagging, the paint peeling, windows were shattered, and the gutters were overflowing with debris. The land it sat on still held value. He could sell that for a profit and have a nice nest egg for a new life. Others wondered why he didn't kill himself a long time ago. It seemed he had nothing to live for. They wondered if maybe he was afraid to see his family on the other side after what he'd done to them. But stubbornly, he clung to life and stuck to the exact same routine year after year. Everyone watched as his health slowly declined. His teeth rotted, his hair fell out. In the last weeks before we decided to ask him for an interview, his skin, eyes, and nails had turned a sickly yellow. Hillary recognized the signs of liver failure from health class and knew Alfred was dying. If we wanted to speak with him, We knew it would need to be soon. We thought we might inquire with Mr. Phillips to see if he could leave a message with Alfred that we were trying to do a report on his story, the real story, that we had new information to share with him as well. But we were too late. After school one afternoon, we went to the auto shop, and Mr. Phillips told us that Alfred had collapsed while working the previous day. He'd been taken to the hospital and had died just hours before we arrived. He'd only just received word himself that Alfred didn't make it. We left, disappointed at first that we may not get a satisfactory end for our story. But Hillary had an idea. You know, if word hasn't gotten out yet that he's gone, we could probably sneak into the house and do some investigating without anyone being the wiser, she said. It's risky. We probably won't be the only ones with that idea. They might even send the police out to keep an eye on the place given its history. I replied. Exactly. Us and Mr. Phillips are the only ones that know right now, save some people at the hospital. This could be our only chance to get in there and check things out. Don't you want to get an end for the story? She prodded. I had to agree that she was right. We'd been working on the story for months, studying the case for years. This likely was our only chance to get into the house undisturbed and investigate. After a brief hesitation, I said yes. Dusk was already falling, so we ran home to grab flashlights and each told our parents that we were heading to the library to work on our article. We'd done this many times before, so they raised no suspicions and merely asked that we be back by 9 p.m. as it was a school night. And that's how we ended up standing on Alfred Mitchell's porch, just as the sun set, reading the words, "Don't look at them," carved into his front door. Well, go ahead. Hillary nudged me forward. Though it had been her idea in the first place, it was clear she wanted me to be the person to enter the house first. Steeling myself, I twisted the doorknob, finding it unlocked, slowly pushed the door inward and shined my light into the entryway. The state of the interior was worse than the exterior. Empty liquor bottles littered so much of the floor that it would be nearly impossible to take a step without kicking one, and a stench of rotten, moldy food permeated the air. My initial impression was one of shock that Alfred had actually survived as long as he did. I stepped into the house, beckoning for Hillary to follow behind me, and quickly realized that the front door wasn't the only surface with words carved into it. Nearly every square inch of reachable wall was covered in foreboding phrases. Don't look at them. Don't touch them. It's not them. They're dead. The faces are wrong. Just listen to their voices. It took them. It wants this. It feeds on your pain. Holy fuck, are you reading this? I whispered to Hillary. Yeah, Jesus. Maybe he was hallucinating towards the end. That can happen to long-term alcoholics. Her voice was shaking ever so slightly. I tried a light switch on the wall near the door, but nothing happened. Looks like he wasn't paying the electric bill. Should we keep going? I asked. Yeah, let's see if he kept a journal or something. I'll look for an office. You check his bedroom. She tiptoed away from me as quietly as she could across the trash-strewn floor. I didn't particularly like the idea of splitting up, but we knew our time might be limited, and the decision was already made for me, so I walked towards the steps to head to the second floor. Along the way, Alfred's carvings kept hovering into my flashlight beam, and a chill crept down my spine as I continued reading. Don't look at them. Don't look at them. Everything in my body was telling me that we should leave as quickly as possible, but I kept forcing one foot in front of the other until I came across what appeared to be the master bedroom. Dusty photos of Alfred and Elizabeth sat on the nightstands, and pictures of Marcy and Maggie hung on the walls next to yet more carvings. Most of the phrases were repeated, but there was a new one in this room. Tape your eyes shut. On one of the nightstands, I noticed a roll of medical tape and surmised that Alfred must have used it to seal his eyes closed every night before bed. Something about it made my stomach turn, but I'd already made it this far. I figured I should at least try to find something we could use for the article. And I didn't need to look far. On the dresser, there was an old, withered journal that looked as if it had been read cover to cover several thousand times. I picked it up, sat on the bed, and cracked it open, taking photos of the pages as I read. The date started in early 1984, shortly after Alfred had been released from jail. February 4th, 1984. I'm hearing things ever since I got back to this wretched house. No one will believe me. I'm not sure I can believe myself anymore. I wish I would have written it all down as it was happening before, just so I could know I'm not crazy. Better late than never, I suppose. I'll start with the weeks leading up to the night of December 5th, as best I recall them now. The first week in the house was perfect. The girls liked their new room. Elizabeth loved the big kitchen. We all enjoyed the spacious backyard. We were so happy. Then, one night, Elizabeth said she heard something coming from the basement when she had gone downstairs for a glass of water. Said it sounded like scratching. She asked if I could go check and make sure an animal wasn't trapped down there. I went down and heard no scratching nor saw an animal, but I noticed a small hole in the concrete floor, perfectly round and maybe a half-inch in diameter. Just wide enough to drop a pen down, which I did to see how deep it went. I never heard it hit the bottom. I chalked it up to shoddy workmanship and planned to call the construction company in the morning. However, when I went back down to check it before leaving for work the next day, it was gone. Impossible, I told myself, but I had been half asleep when Elizabeth asked me to check out the noise. I wondered if maybe I'd been partially dreaming, but the pen I dropped down was missing when I looked for it. I thought again about calling the construction company, but how could I have them inspect a hole that wasn't there? Things escalated quickly after that. Elizabeth heard more noises coming from the basement at night that I couldn't, and the girls heard them too. They'd say, "Daddy, there's scratching and tapping coming from down there. Can't you hear it?" I tried desperately, straining for any sound, but got nothing. Still, though I wasn't hearing anything, every night I checked the basement, and every night I found the hole. It grew wider each time I saw it, eventually growing large enough that I could fit my arm into it. I reached down trying to find the bottom, but couldn't. I felt nothing but air and perfectly smooth walls, like glass. Yet no matter how big the hole was the night before, in the morning, it was always gone. I began to wonder if I might be hallucinating or going insane. I even had someone come out and look for a gas leak, but everything checked out okay during their inspection. At this point, I forbade Elizabeth and the girls from going into the basement at all. When the hole was almost big enough that the girls could fit into it, the voices started. Elizabeth said she heard whispering coming up the stairs. She said it was telling her to take the girls down there, that it wanted to meet them. I was at a loss for what to do. I wanted to tell someone, but I didn't know who. I couldn't well report a hole in the basement that only appeared at night. My wife was hearing voices that I couldn't, and then the girls heard it too. They said it sounded nice and they wanted to go down and say hi. I didn't want everyone to think we were crazy. We were in a brand new house. Things like this weren't supposed to happen in brand new houses. I decided that they should leave for a while, at least until I could try and figure out what was going on, and I begged Elizabeth to take the girls to her mother's, but she refused to go. In fact, they all did. Her and the girls liked the voice. They said it was nice and they wanted to talk to it more. They pleaded with me to let them go downstairs. I seemed to be the only one that was concerned with what was happening and knew I at least had to try something to protect my family. I bought a deadbolt, installed it on the basement door to truly prevent them from going down there, and wore the key around my neck. I thought that that would be enough. But I was stupid. I was dealing with something I didn't comprehend, just wishing that it would go away, and it cost me my family. On the night of the 5th, Elizabeth tucked in the girls and then came to bed with me. She read a little before closing her eyes and falling asleep. Once she was out, I felt safe enough to close my own eyes and drifted off as well. Around 2 a.m., I awoke to a loud bang from downstairs and realized that Elizabeth was no longer next to me. I ran down to the girls' room and saw they were missing from their beds too. Sprinting downstairs, I saw that the basement door was wide open and felt for the key around my neck. It was still there, but the deadbolt had unlocked itself. I charged down the stairs as quickly as I could, yelling for Elizabeth and the girls, screaming at them to stay away from the hole. But I was too late. The hole was wider than ever, wide enough that all three of them would be able to fit into it at once. Elizabeth turned to me and said, "It's okay. It's nice. It just wants to meet us," before taking the hands of Maggie and Marcy on either side of her and leaping in with both of them. "No!" I shouted and ran forward to try and catch them. When I reached the edge, I looked down, but they were already too deep to see. So, I decided to follow. Shutting my eyes, I leapt forward, expecting to plummet an untold distance, maybe to my death even, but my feet landed on solid concrete. I opened my eyes. The hole was gone. I felt all over the floor for it, pleaded to God for it to come back, but it wouldn't open. Grabbing tools from the shed, I desperately started digging, trying to find it, and that's when the police found me. I couldn't explain it to them. I couldn't explain it to anyone, but I knew in my heart that they were gone forever. Something took them, and it's never going to give them back. But now that I'm back home, I think I hear them sometimes. Just a whisper, or a giggle in the darkness. Are they still here somewhere? February 10th, 1984. I saw the girls. I clearly heard laughter coming from their room. I would have recognized it anywhere. Quietly, I creaked the door open, and there they were, playing with their dolls. Immediately, I broke down in tears and called their names. They called back together, "Hi, Daddy." It was their voices. Their sweet, beautiful voices. Slowly, they turned around, in unison, and I saw their faces. It wasn't them. The faces were wrong. The eyes were black, and the skin was pulled so tight they looked skeletal. I gasped and backed out of the room as quickly as possible. "What's the matter, Daddy? Aren't you happy to see us?" They chimed. "That's okay, Daddy. It likes it when you're scared. Are you scared, Daddy?" I ran back to my room, slammed, and locked the door. I didn't hear them anymore, but I felt sick to my stomach. It had been so wonderful to hear their voices again. Part of me wanted to go out and try to talk to them. Was I hallucinating? They're not real. They can't be. They're gone. If you see them again, don't look at them. It's not them. February 14th, 1984. Elizabeth came to bed tonight, a Valentine's Day treat. I woke up feeling a weight beside me and momentarily forgot my circumstances. "Hey, Alfie." I heard my wife's voice speak her pet name for me and whispered back, "Hey, Ellie." I felt her hand grab mine. It was cold, ice cold, so cold that it startled my eyes open and I saw her face, the black eyes, the sunken skin. I screamed and fell out of bed. "What's the matter, honey? Aren't you happy to see me?" She cooed. "Are you scared? Does this hurt? It likes it when you hurt." Her voice was rising. "Come back to bed, baby. Give me a kiss like you used to. Don't you miss me?" I slammed my eyes shut and repeated over and over again. "Don't look at her. It's not her. Don't look at her. It's not her. She's not real." When I opened my eyes, she was gone. Was she real, though? I felt her hand. Why is it tormenting me? What is it? They say it enjoys my pain. I felt sick to my stomach again. Seeing her had been horrible, but for a brief moment, when I just heard her voice, I was happy. Don't look at them. Don't touch them. Just listen to their voices if they come back. February 20th, 1984. They all came together. I heard what sounded like plates being set at the table and walked down to the dining room to see Elizabeth sitting, the girls down to eat. I shut my eyes as quickly as I could and just listened. Elizabeth said, "Come join us, Alfie." The girls added on, "Yeah, Daddy, come sit with us." In my head, I knew it wasn't them asking for me, but in my heart, for just a moment, I had my family back. "Open your eyes, Daddy," the girls demanded. "Look at us!" All three of them shouted in unison now. Don't you want to see us? Don't you miss us? Why didn't you stop us? You let us die. Look at us. I spoke back to them. I do miss you. I love you and miss you all so much. I'm so sorry. That's good. It feels your pain. It feels your sorrow. It wants more. Again, when I opened my eyes, they were gone, but something else lingered. The scent of my wife's perfume. I broke down in tears again. I don't think I'm hallucinating. I still don't know what it is, but I think I'm starting to understand it. It feeds on pain, and it's going to keep sending them back to torture me. Should I leave? They're not them, but if I close my eyes when I hear them, I feel like they're back for a moment. No, I'm not going to leave. I'm going to stay with them. I'm going to hear my girls laugh and my wife call my name, even if it's only to torture me. I'll stay alive. I'll feed it, and it'll keep them alive for me. I read a few more entries, but they were much the same. Alfred kept seeing his wife and daughters around the house, and they berated him for letting them die. But for a brief instant, he got to have them back, and it was enough that he allowed himself to be tortured by bastardized representations of them for 30 years. At some point, he started drinking to cope with it, and the entries grew sloppier. In 1986, he stopped giving details of their appearances and just started penning the same phrases over and over again. I assumed that when he ran out of space in the journal, he started carving those same phrases into the walls. I shut the book, and as I did, I felt a weight press down on the bed behind me. My heart leapt into my throat. I'd been so engrossed in Alfred's story that I'd forgotten that I was still in his house, at night, where he'd been haunted by the ghosts of his family for decades. "Hillary?" I desperately sputtered, hoping that she'd snuck past me when I was reading. "Who are you?" A woman's voice I did not recognize whispered in my ear. I felt her breath on my face. I spun around and saw black eyes, a hollow face. Elizabeth's features were recognizable from the photos on the nightstand, but the woman before me looked wrong. So wrong. Screaming, I leapt from the bed and tore for the door. From down the hall, I heard the giggling of little girls. "Who is it, Mommy? Does he want to play? Where's his friend? Is she going to join us in the hole?" Their sing-song voices squealed in unison. Hillary! Where was she? I hadn't heard anything from her since I left her downstairs. "Hillary!" I shouted. She didn't answer. "Hillary! We have to go now!" I ran as quickly as I could down the stairs. All the while behind me I could hear the Mitchell women. "Where are you going, new friend? Stay with us a while. It's hungry and Alfred hasn't been home for days." "Don't look at them! Don't look at them!" I chanted in my head as I continued to sprint through the house. "Hillary! Where the fuck are you? We need to leave!" "The basement." I'm not sure how I knew, but something told me I'd find Hillary down there. Using my flashlight, I saw the path she'd made through the bottles on the floor to the basement stairs and charged for the door. "Hillary, don't go in! Don't go in the hole! It's trying to take you!" When I made it to the bottom step, she was nearly to the edge. I was running across the floor when she turned back to me and said, "Don't worry, Sam. It's nice. It just wants to meet me." I knew what was coming next. She turned back and stepped to the edge of the abyss. I dropped my flashlight and dove, managing to grab her around the ankles just as she was trying to leap. She kicked me in the face, screaming for me to let her go meet the voice. But I held as tightly as I could and pulled her so that she fell backwards on top of me. Thankfully, when she landed, she snapped out of it. Sam, is that you?" "I can't see shit. Where am I?" she asked. "Yay, it's me. Listen, Hillary, we're in the basement. Alfred's basement. You have to get up and we have to get out of her now." I picked up my flashlight and grabbed her hand. As I did, my light illuminated the hole. Holy shit. Is that? Yes, it's the hole. It's real. And it's why we need to get the fuck out of here. I pulled her forward and towed her as quickly as I could back up the basement steps. But when we reached the first floor, Elizabeth, Maggie, and Marcy were blocking the front door. "What's the matter? Don't you want to join us? It wants you, Hillary." "What the fuck?" Hillary screamed next to me. "Hillary, don't look at them! Trust me, shut your eyes and say it with me! Don't look at them! It's not them! They're dead! Don't look at them! It's not them! They're dead!" We chanted over and over, and when we opened our eyes, they were gone. Bolting through the front door, we ran as hard as we could all the way home, never once looking back. It wasn't until we were safely through my front door and up into my room that we stopped to catch our breaths, and I told her everything that had happened. I explained what was in Alfred's journal, how Elizabeth had shown up right behind me, how I knew that Hillary would be in the basement, and how she nearly jumped into the hole. We had the ending for our story. We knew the truth of what had happened to Elizabeth, Maggie, and Marcy back in 1983, and the torment that Alfred suffered for it. And we knew that we couldn't publish it. Our school paper would never run it. It was too, well, unbelievable. Also, we'd technically broken into the house to get the information, and Hillary had nearly died. We thought it best to keep that part of the story to ourselves. Unfortunately, that also meant that we couldn't exonerate Alfred, but we did go and pay our respects at his funeral. Attended only by me, Hillary, and Mr. Phillips, it was there that he told us that Alfred willed him the house and the property, but had left the stipulation that he bulldoze the house to the ground and never build another in that location. And he did. As of this writing, the lot still sits empty. I just pray it stays that way. As for Hillary and I, we never did get married, but have remained close friends to this day. We rarely speak about the events back in 2013. We just feel lucky that we both made it out alive. Although Hillary recently told me that sometimes she has a dream. She hears a voice, a sweet voice calling to her, telling her that it wants to meet her and to come find it.